Good morning, friends. Welcome to Gyan channel. Today we will be discussing about basic principles of mass communication, and we will be discussing on the following topics: defining communication types, need, functions, significance, concept of mass communication, and finally Marshall McLuhan's Global Village. A separate video for Hindi speaking language is also available. You can watch that also if you are having any difficulty in English. Let's begin with the video. First of all, we will discuss about the history of communication. History of communication dates back to the earlier signs of life, when life came into existence. Since then, communication is in existence. Communication ranges from very subtle process of exchange to full conversations and mass communication. Human communication revolutionized with speech about 2 lakh years ago. Symbols were developed about 30,000 years ago, writing developed about 7,000 years ago, and on a much shorter scale, we can say that there have been major developments in the field of telecommunication in the past few centuries. Communication between animals. Animal communication is any behavior by one animal that has an effect on the current or future behavior of another animal. Study of animal communication is called semiotics, and it has played an important part in the development of ethnology, sociobiology, and the study of animal cognition. Animal communication and the understanding of the animal world in general is a rapidly growing field, and major prior understandings related to diverse fields such as personal symbolic name use, animal emotions, animal culture and learning, and even sexual conduct, long thought to be well understood, have been revolutionized. Communication between humans. First of all, we talk about speech. Evolution of brain differentiated humans from animals, as among other things, it allowed humans to master a very efficient form of communication, that is speech. FOXP2 gene, which appeared in Homo sapiens about 2 lakh years ago, was likely responsible for much of this change. Speech greatly facilitated the transmission of information and knowledge to further generations. It meant easier coordination and cooperation, technological progress, and development of complex, abstract concepts such as religion or science. Speech placed humans at the top of the food chain and facilitated human colonization of the entire planet. Talk about single symbols. The imperfections of speech, which nonetheless allowed easier dissemination of ideas and stimulated inventions, eventually resulted in the creation of new forms of communication, that is called symbols. This improved both the range at which people could communicate and the longevity of the information. All of these inventions were based on key concept of the symbol, a conventional representation of a concept. Cave paintings, oldest known symbols created with the purpose of communication through times, are the cave paintings, a form of rock art dating to the upper Paleolithic. Homo sapiens' first attempts at passing information through time took the form of paintings. The oldest known cave painting is that of the Chaulet Cave, dating around 30,000 BC. Petroglyphs. Petroglyphs is called the carving into a rock surface. The next step of history of communication was petroglyphs. It took about 20,000 years for Homo sapiens to move from first cave paintings to the first petroglyphs, which is dated to around 10,000 BC. Pictograms. Pictogram or pictograph is a symbol representing a concept, object, activity, place, or event by illustration. Pictographs were the next step in the evolution of communication. Pictograms were used by various ancient cultures all over the world since around 9000 BC. Then, when tokens marked with simple pictures began to be used to label basic form produce and became increasingly popular around 6000 to 5000 BC. They were the basis of cuneiform and hieroglyphs and began to develop into logographic writing systems around 5000 BC. Ideograms. Pictograms in turn evolve into ideograms, graphical symbols that represent an idea. Their ancestors, the pictograms, could represent only something resembling their form. Therefore, a pictogram of a circle could represent a sun, but not concepts like heat, light, day, or great god of the sun. Ideograms, on the other hand, could convey more abstract concepts, so that, for example, an ideogram of two sticks can mean not only legs but also a verb to walk. For example, an eye with a tear means sadness in Native American ideograms in California. Writing. 26th century BC Sumerian cuneiform script in Sumerian language listing gifts to the high priestess of Adab on the occasion of her election is one of the earliest examples of human writing. Most writing systems can be broadly divided into three categories: logographic, syllabic, and alphabetic. Alphabetic is also called segmental. Alphabets. The first pure alphabets emerged around 2000 BC in ancient Egypt. By 2700 BC, Egyptian writing had a set of some 22 hieroglyphs to represent syllables that begin with a single consonant of their language, plus a vowel or no vowel to be supplied by native speaker. These glyphs were used as pronunciation guides for logograms to write grammatical inflections and later to transcribe loan words and foreign names. In the Middle Bronze Age, an apparently alphabetic system is thought by some to have been developed in Central Egypt around 1700 BC, followed by Semitic workers, but we cannot read these early writings and their exact nature remain open to interpretation. Over the next 5 centuries, this Semitic alphabet seems to have spread north. Subsequent alphabets around the world have either descended from it or have been inspired by one of its descendants. Communication and its meaning. Communication is a word which is taken from Latin communicare, word meaning to share. It is an act of conveying meanings from one entity or group to another through the use of mutually understood signs, symbols, and semiotic rules. The main steps inherent in all communications are the information of communicative motivation or a reason, a message composition, message encoding, for example, into digital data, written text, speech, pictures, etc. Transmission of the encoded message as a sequence of signals using medium or specific channel. Noise source such as natural forces and in some cases human activity begin influencing the quality of signals propagating from sender to receiver. Reception of signals and reassembling of the encoded message from a sequence of received signals. Decoding of the reassembled encoded message. Interpretation and making sense of the presumed original message. Scientific study of communication can be divided into information theory, communication studies, biosemiotics, and biocommunication. Information theory studies quantification, storage, and communication of information in general. Communication study includes human communication only. Biosemiotics examines communication in and between living organisms in general, and biosemiotics and biocommunication exemplifies sign mediated interactions in and between organisms of all domains of life, including viruses. Now we talk about nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication explains the processes of conveying a type of information in a form of non-linguistic representations. Examples of nonverbal communication include haptic communication, chronemic communication, gestures, body language, facial expressions, eye contact, etc. Speech also contains nonverbal elements known as paralanguage, for example, rhythm, intonation, tempo, and stress. It affects communication most at the subconscious level and establishes trust. When verbal messages contradict non-verbal message, observation of non-verbal behavior is relied on to judge another's attitude and feelings rather than assuming the truth of the verbal message alone. Non-verbal behaviors may form a universal language system. Smiling, crying, pointing, caressing, and glaring are non-verbal behaviors that are used and understood by people regardless of nationality. It breaks the language barriers. Verbal communication is the spoken or written conveyance of a message. Human language can be defined as a system of symbols and the grammars, the, we can say rules also, by which the symbols are manipulated. Most of the large number of human languages use patterns of sound or gestures or symbols which enable communication with others around them. There is no defined line between a language and a dialect. Language can be characterized as symbolic. The properties of language are governed by rules. Language follows phonological rules, syntactic rules, semantic rules, and pragmatic rules. Contrary to popular beliefs, signed languages of the world are considered to be verbal communication because their sign vocabulary, grammar, and other linguistic structures abide by all the necessary classifications as spoken languages. Now we talk about communication process. Communication is the process of sending a message through different media, whether it is verbal or non-verbal, so as a person transmits a thought-provoking idea, gesture, action, etc. There are numerous definitions about communication, and yet there is no agreement on single definition. Some of the more functional definitions of communication describe it as transfer or conveying of meaning. It came from Oxford Dictionary. Transmission of stimuli, Colin Cherry. One mind affecting another, Claude Shannon. Communication is more than mere transferring or transmission of ideas or thoughts. It is not a static act as some of earlier definitions suggest, but it is dynamic process of action and interaction towards desired goal as suggested by the late definitions. Communication is therefore a process of sharing or exchange of ideas, information, knowledge, attitude, or feeling among two or more persons through certain signs and symbols. Now, processes and elements of communication. Communication is a dynamic process, ongoing and ever changing, which involves five major elements. The five elements are message, the sender, the transmission medium, the receiver, and the feedback. Now we talk about source or sender. The communicator is the source of communication which begins the communication process by transmitting information to the receiver. Encoding the message, whether written or oral, is a process that requires four separate steps. Firstly, formulate the message, putting thoughts into words. Secondly, passing the message through many psychological or internal communication barriers. Thirdly, encoding the message, simply string words together to actually putting the message into some form of code. And lastly, transmitting the message, whether it is oral or written form. A good communicator immediately becomes receiver and prepares to accept feedback for verification of message delivery. Communication is only successful when both the sender and the receiver understand the same information as a result of communication. Now we talk about message. A message is in its most general meaning is the most fundamental object of communication. It is something which provides information. It can also be the information itself. Therefore, its meaning is dependent upon the context in which it is used. The term may apply to both the information and its form. The message can be transferred through spoken and written mediums such as radio programs, films, paintings, posters, photographs, etc. However, a message is not only transferred information but the emotions that give the words meaning. Words alone do not establish the full meaning of a message. Nonverbal communication may give clues that the receiver can use to interpret verbal messages. We talk about transmission medium, that is also called channel. Messages are conveyed through channels which with verbal including face-to-face meetings, telephone and video conferencing, and written including letters, emails, memos, and reports. Different channels have different strengths and weaknesses. The transmission medium is the pathway by which the message flows. It is vehicle that carries the message from the sender to the receiver and back. The medium can be electronic, written, verbal, or non-verbal. The receiver. Receiver is the element of the communication process that interprets the meaning of the message. Only when the receiver has understood the message can true communication take place. The receiver also goes through an internal setup process related to incoming messages. Upon obtaining the message, the receiver decodes it through assimilation and interpretation. Receiving process is made up of the following steps that are receive, decode, filter, and interpret. To decode a message effectively, sender and receiver must be communicating in the same language. Now we talk about feedback. Perhaps the greatest cause of ineffective communication is failure of the sender to request feedback from the receiver. Feedback is the element of communication which confirms that the message has been received and understood. It implies the sender's process by verifying that the meaning has not changed in most written forms. Encoding. This is the process of transmitting the information you want to communicate into a form that can be sent and correctly decoded at the other end. Decoding is just successful encoding. As successful encoding is a skill, so is successful decoding. A message should be decoded carefully to get its true form. Hence, it is the interpretation of the message by the receiver. Noise. It is an interruption that can creep in at any point of the communication process and make it ineffective. Environment is one major cause that interferes with message receptions, like noises from the roadside, constant chattering of individuals outside the communication act, blaring loudspeaker, faulty transmission, etc. The barriers of effective communication are poor handwriting, heavy accent, or soft speech. Communication is a poorly in a poorly lit room, etc. For a smooth and effective communication, it is necessary to eliminate or reduce noise as far as possible. Now we talk about the kinds of communication. First of all, intrapersonal communication. Every time an introvert does something or speaks, he hears his thought within himself. Just like that, intrapersonal communication is language used or thought internal to the communicator. Individual becomes his or her own sender and receiver, providing feedback to him or her in ongoing internal process. It can be useful to envision intrapersonal communication occurring in the mind of the individual in a model which contains a sender, receiver, and a feedback loop. Interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication is defined by communication scholars in numerous ways, though most definitions involving participants who are interdependent on one another have a shared history. Communication channels are the medium chosen to convey the message from sender to receiver. Communication channels can be categorized into two main categories: direct channel of communication and indirect channel of communication. Group communication. Group communication examines the most effective ways of communication and interacting within social and work groups, as it provides an opportunity for direct interaction among the members of the group, which helps in bringing about changes in attitude and beliefs and offers a clear understanding. Group communication occurs among three or more persons. Three general categories have been identified as critical to successful group communication. They are commitment, communication, and organization. Mass communication. Mass communication is the term used to describe the academic study of various means by which individuals and entities relay information to large segments of the population, all at once through mass media. It is usually understood to relate a newspaper and magazines, publishing, radio, television, and films, as they are used both for disseminating news and for advertising. Now we talk about functions of communication. There are two approaches of communication. One is rhetorical approach and second is need-based approach. In rhetorical approach, we can say passage of information, education, persuasion, motivation, instruction, raising morale, advice and warning are type of rhetorical approach. Need-based approaches are physical, identity, and social based. If we talk about need of communication, it is needed for survival. As living organisms grew in number and evolved, so did the need to communicate for procreation and recreation, to alert and warn impending risks and dangers, to find new sources of food, to establish territoriality, and so on. As sexually developed, it became necessary to find partners and to communicate one's eligibility to. Extra intra-species as well as interspecies communication help growth, survival, dominance, diversity, and evolution. As geographical distances increased, the messages needed to reach farther, and humans added to other dissemination of their communication means radio wave, satellite communication, etc. Whales and dolphins can also communicate through vast distances. Some animals use different frequencies also to communicate with each other. As larger group communication becomes important to establish and maintain territoriality and geographical limitation, public dominance to conquer new lands, new areas, adopt to new regions, development and exchange of culture and knowledge, and so on. The concept of mass. Mass denotes great volume, range or extent, and reception of messages in a large population. The important point about mass is not that given number of individuals receive the products, but rather that the products are available in principle to a plurality of recipients. The term mass suggests that the recipients of media products constitute a vast sea of passive, undifferentiated individuals. This is an image associated with some earlier critics of mass culture and mass society, which generally assume that the development of mass communication has had a largely negative impact on modern social life, creating a kind of bland and homogeneous culture which entertains individuals about challenging them. Now we talk about functions of mass communication. First of all, information sharing. Information as a concept wears a diversity of means from everyday usage of technical settings. Generally speaking, the concept of information is closely related to notions of constraint, communication, control, data, form, instruction, knowledge, meaning, mental stimulus, pattern, perception, and representation. Many people speak about the information age as the advent of the knowledge age or knowledge society. The information society, the information revolution, and information technologies, and even though informatics. Information science and computer science are often in the spotlight. The word information is often used without careful consideration of the various meanings it has acquired. Next function is persuasion. Persuasion is form of social influence. It is the process of guiding people toward the adoption of an idea, attitude, or action by rational and symbolic means. It is a strategy of problem solving relying on appeals rather than strength. Manipulation is taking persuasion to an extreme where one person or group benefit at the cost of the other. Aristotle said that one of the most important functions of communication is to persuade the other party, but it is possible that one may resort to persuasion with an ulterior motive. The receiver must be careful about the source of such persuasion. Debate and discussion. Debate is a formal method of interactive argument. Debate is a broader form of argument than logical argument, since it includes persuasion which appeals to the emotional responses of an audience and rules which enable people to decide on differences, which is within a framework of defining how they will interact. Instruction. Instruction is a form of communicated information that is both command and explanation for how an action, behavior, method, or task is to begin, completed, conducted, or executed. One of the major functions of communication is to instruct, educate, and socialize the members of the society. Entertainment. Entertainment is an activity designed to give pleasure or relaxation to an audience. This audience may participate in the entertainment passively, as in watching opera or a movie, or actively in the games. Playing sports and reading literature are usually included in entertainment, but these are often called recreation because they involve some active participation. participation beyond mere leisure. Cultural promotion. Communication is a major source of cultural preservation and promotion. It helps an individual to pursue thus and satisfy their creative urge. Communication provides opportunity for culture to be preserved and promoted. It stimulates individuals to pursue and fulfill their creative urges. Integration. Communication is a great source for disseminating knowledge and information, which further helps in social integration. Communication is a great integrating tool. Through a fund of knowledge or information, individuals, groups, or cultures come to know one another, understand and appreciate each other's way of life, and thereby develop tolerance towards one another. It can also be a greatest integrating tool. Now we talk about seven C's of communication. These are very important C's which have important role in communication. They are content, context, channel, clarity, composition, contrast, and consistency. First, we talk about content. It is the best possible measure of communication effectiveness. What do you want your audience to walk away with and remember? Once you have defined your prime question, set out to answer it. What information is required? Do you have the answer already or do you need to search it out? The content determines the audience, and the message must have a meaning for the receiver and it must be compatible with its value system. Then coming context. The context must be clear and should not contradict the message. It must provide for participation and playback what's going on. Do you understand the situation? Is there a dead elephant in the middle of the room that you are not aware of? Ask good questions. You will need a clear goal before you begin to design any communication. Next is channels. Only the established channels of communication should be used. Creating new ones is difficult. Different channels have different effects and severe served effectively in different stages of the diffusion process. Clarity is one of the hardest part of the process and most often neglected. People's intention will quickly drift. They expect you to get to the point. Learn to edit. The message must be put in simple terms. Words must mean the same thing for the receiver as they do it for the sender. Complex issues must be compressed into theme slogans that have simplicity and clarity. The farther the message has to travel, the simpler it should be. The composition, delivery, the way you will tell your story, think in terms of both written and visual composition. When writing, who are your main characters? How will you set up the scene? What are the goals and conflicts that will develop? How will the story reach resolution? In visual terms, where will the reader begin? How will you lead the eye around the page? In all your compositional thinking, how will you engage your audience? How will you keep them engaged? Writing down, focus you to think it through. Communication must break down into basic building blocks of content. Formulate the information into clusters and groups. What patterns emerge? How can you make the information more modular? Given your goal, what is the most fundamental unified information? You can use index card to break down information into modules. Contrast. What are the differences that matter? Use contrast to highlight them. Big versus little, rough versus smooth, black versus white. When making any point, ask in comparison with what. Contrast is a trigger to the brain that says pay attention. Consistency. Unless you are highlighting differences, keep things like color, font, spacing, and type sizes consistent to avoid distracting people. Research shows that the extraneous information will distract from people's ability to assimilate and learn. Communication is an unending process. It requires repetition to achieve penetration. The story must be consistent. Now we talk about Marshall McLuhan's Global Village. Global Village describes the phenomenon of the entire world becoming one interconnected as the result of the propagation of media technology throughout the world. The term was coined by Canadian media theorist Marshall McLuhan in his book The Gutenberg Galaxy Making of Typographic Man in 1962 and Understanding Media in 1964. Scholar Sun Lin Lee describes how the term global village has become to designate the dominant term of expressing a global coexistence altered by transnational commerce, migration, and culture. Economic journalist Thomas Friedman's definition of the global village as a word tied together into a single globalized marketplace and village is another contemporary understanding of the term. Marshall McLuhan coined the term global village in 1960s. It indicates daily production and consumption of media, images, and content by a global audience. McLuhan based his concept on the understanding of people moving towards involving personal interaction worldwide and the consequences as they ensue and operate simultaneously with their causes. The term global village means all parts of the world as they are being brought together by the internet and other electronic communication interconnections. The new reality of the digital age has implications for forming new socially meaningful structures within the contents of culture. Interchanging messages, stories, opinions, posts, and videos on telecommunication pathways can cause miscommunication. Within the global village framework, individuals transcend micro, meso, and macro dynamics of their life on the daily basis. Individuals tend to get involved in complex communities of network structure worldwide. Electronic media have ability to impact individuals differently for various reasons, such as their religion, politics, beliefs, business, money, etc. The time in which messages are received also affect how a message is understood. Before the global village, individuals tended to stay in tune with the simultaneous mode of their perception and thinking. Today, with the instant communication, the simultaneous mode of prevalent again. Through technology, the creation of social media also allowed people to constantly comment on each other's posts as well as creating them to share with the multimedia global world. New social media are connecting people throughout the world, and users can learn more about cultures different from their own and maintain diverse relationships. Global village and media. People are use technology to fit into a digital community to which they are not physically connected but mentally connected. Each social media platform acts as a digital home for individuals, allowing people to access themselves through global village. Since mass media began, it has called for westernization of the world. Since most of the developing countries acquired the news and entertainment for developed nations like the US, the information received can be biased in favor of developed nations, which connect the world in similarities within the media. According to McLuhan, the enhanced electric speed in bringing all social and political functions together in a sudden implosion has heightened human awareness of responsibility to an intense degree. Increased the speed of communication and the ability of people to read about, spread, and react to global news quickly enables individuals to become more involved with others from various social groups and countries around the world and to be more aware of the global responsibilities. Now we talk about the term global theater. The global village and the electronic media create unified communities. In an interview with Gerald Liston, McLuhan said that it never occurred to him that uniformity and tranquility were the properties of the global village. McLuhan argued that the global village ensures maximum disagreement on all points because it creates more discontinuity and division and diversity under the increase of the village conditions. The global village is far more diverse. After the publication of Understanding Media, McLuhan started using the term global theater to emphasize the changeover from consumer to producer, from acquisition to involvement, from job holding to role playing, stressing that there is no more community to clothe the named specialist. Friends, now this is the end of today's topic. We will meet again in our next topic. Thank you.